Good evening, Rabbi. Tonight we're going to discuss, first of all, to say Chodesh Tov. It's Rosh Chodesh Adar. Misha Nichnas Adar and Barbim Besimcha. We have to have a lot of fun now, enjoyment. We have to have Simcha. We have to enjoy ourselves. What's the best way to enjoy yourself? By learning Torah, of course, right? There's nothing better than that, so that's why we're here. The real Simcha and Simcha is Torah. There's only one Simcha. Torah is a Simcha. So therefore, that's why we're here. Okay, so let's get to it right away. We have a very interesting discussion tonight. Because the truth is, that about a month ago, one of our friends sent a question over the WhatsApp, whatever, and the question was really a good one, very interesting one, and I was very careful not to answer that question right away, because it's quite complicated and very sensitive, delicate subject. It needs very, very painstaking attention to do it the right way. So what did he ask me about? He asked me about Avera Lishma. What does that mean, Avera Lishma? That means the person is doing it, literally, right? The word means you're doing a sin for the sake of heaven. Can you imagine something like that? Did you ever think there was something like that in Judaism? You're sinning for heaven.
No, but I'm not surprised.
You're not surprised?
No.
Okay. So, what does this concept mean? We have to understand, first of all, how to define it. 'Cause it seems like to be a misnomer, like you're doing a sin for the sake of heaven, contradicts one the other. Because the truth is, we have also another concept in the Torah, which says, "En osim mitzvah al yedei avera." We don't do a mitzvah by way of an avera, by way of a sin, So you can't do that. You can't do mitzvah if it has to do also with doing an avera, a sin, to get to that mitzvah. You're not allowed to do that. So that also contradicts what we're saying. Avera Lishma, what does that mean, Avera Lishma? It means that it's for the sake of heaven. But you're not allowed to do that. How can it be for the sake of heaven? That's the whole thing, right? So quite a complicated issue to deal with. You have to understand what that means. So, okay, let's understand a little bit. So, just to get a little bit stronger feel of what's going on here. First of all, comes the Gemara Masechet Nazir. Chav Gimel Amud Aleph Amud Bet over there talks about this whole issue. It says Gadol Avera Lishma Mi Mitzvah Lelo Lishma. Can you imagine such a thing? This is a very strong statement. That it greater is the sin for the sake of heaven than a mitzvah which is not for the sake of heaven. It's greater. What does that mean, greater? It's holier. So all of a sudden, right now, you're coming into some interesting territory. That this is considered a very holy thing. It's like holy of holies, Avera Lishma. You're doing a sin for the sake of heaven. So, in order to understand that, Gemara brings over there some examples of that. Masechet Nazir. So what does it talk about? It talks about, for instance, right, compares two stories. One is the story of Zimri, and the other story is the story of Tamar. I'll give you some background, right, on those stories that make you understand, to bring you into the picture, right? But before we get to that, I just want to say one thing. To preempt this whole thing, as a preamble, right, to the Constitution, right? Lo aleinu, lehavdil.
Which doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist anymore, right? Okay, so what am I telling you? That there's also more simple forms of Avera Lishma, doing a sin for the sake of heaven. More simple forms. Give you two contradicting forms of this. One applies, one doesn't apply. One fits into it, one does not fit in order you should understand. For instance, it says the Gemara something amazing. This is in Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Mem Amud Aleph. It says over there that if a person feels like an inkling, a strong desire to do a sin, and he can't stop it, just his body, is pushing him. The Yetzer Hara is pushing him. He can't hold back. So says the Gemara, at least what you should do is, if you're going to go and do the sin, right, do one thing. Put on some black clothing, like Richie Blackmore, black. He used to wear black all the time, right? So put on some black clothing. Go to a place where they don't know you over there. Nobody knows you, Go to, I don't know, Louisiana, whatever, Go somewhere over there. Go to Las Vegas. Nobody knows you there. There are some people that are going to know you there because there's always tourists going there. Whatever, right? Go to some place like that. Nobody knows you. And, do it in a way, very modest, like understated way. Don't make a lot of noise. And why? So why should you wear black? What's the point of wearing black? Because you look inconspicuous. You don't make a lot of noise. It's like nobody's gonna watch you. Like he's black. It's kind of nothing special. Whatever. Go under the table, undercurrent. That's the idea, right? Wear black, and also go to a place where they know you. Why? Because don't make like a chilul Hashem. Don't desecrate the name of God. Because they know you, they're gonna say, "Oh, isn't it this guy? Yeah, this guy who lives in Queens Boulevard. He's the one who's doing this. Oh my God, So in order to avoid that, what they're telling you is, go to a place where they don't know you. At least they won't know who you are. Just like any Joe Schmo. Some unknown person, right? Unidentified human being. So why does the Gemara tell you to do that? All these things. Because when you do at least if you're going to do a sin, do it in the smallest possible way, which is going to cause the least amount of damage. That's the idea, So to minimize the harm of the sin. So now let me ask you a question. With all these things that you heard just right now, right? Is that called Avera Lishma? Is that a sin for the sake of heaven? What you just did now? What would you say? What would you say about that? Right? So the answer is no. That's not called sin for the sake of heaven. What's the reason why? Because you're not doing it for the sake of heaven. You're doing it for your own lusts. The fact that you're diminishing it by wearing black and going to a place where they don't know you, it doesn't mean you're doing it for heaven. You're still doing it for yourself. For your bodily lusts. So that's not called Avera Lishma, right? We have to understand that. This is still a sin. What does that mean? He's going to be punished for that. Eventually, everything will come, everything is going to be, there's going to be a cheshbon, there's going to be accounting for that. Yeah. Okay, fine. So that's not Avera Lishma. There's also another Gemara, which is in Masechet Yevamot, Daf Gimel, Amud Bet. It says over there, Mitzvat aseh doche lo taseh. What does that mean? Now, let's say a person has a certain thing that he needs to do, a positive commandment, like put on tefillin, put on tzitzit, something positive. Go do actively something, a mitzvah. Go and eat matzah on Pesach. It's active. Take the lulav, active. Have children, right? Procreate, active. These are all active mitzvot. So comes the Gemara and says that a mitzvah like this, which is active, even though while you're doing it, you're going to be also doing something which is a negative, you're going to be transgressing a negative prohibition. In other words, do not do this, do not do that. But if there's no other way to do it except if you're going to transgress, so then what happens is the positive pushes aside the negative and you do it. Even though you're doing a sin. You're going over a negative prohibition, right? But since the positive tells you to do it, the positive mitzvah, but there's no negative mitzvah which says not to do it. But what happens is that the rule is, the Talmud, the positive comes and pushes aside the negative. So therefore you do it. But you have to qualify that, right? Very important qualification. The way we qualify it is that only is allowed to do this kind of thing if there's no other way to do that mitzvah besides transgressing. But if there is another way to do it, which you won't transgress, then you should do it that way. You know what I mean? So it's not a free-for-all over here, right, this whole thing, It only applies when there's no other way to do the mitzvah except by way of a sin. So then comes the positive and pushes aside the negative. That's the rule, right? So is this called Avera Lishma? Yeah, this is called Avera Lishma. This example. What does that mean? That I'm doing a sin, but because I have a mitzvah to do, which pushes aside the sin, and there's no other way to do it besides that, so I'm allowed to do it. The Torah tells you, go ahead, go for it. As long as there's no other way to do it besides that. That's a small example of Avera Lishma. You're doing a sin for the sake of heaven. What does that mean? There's no other way to do it. I want to do this mitzvah, but I have to transgress also. There's no other way, so I'm going to do it. By the way, there's a lot of rules about that, how it's done or whatever. I don't want to get into now the whole discussion about the rules of asel, dochel taseh. There are limitations, there are rules. You have to study this in the Talmud and the Halakha. There's a lot of things to study about that. We're not here now to talk about this particular issue. But anyway, there's a concept like that. So we have one example here. We'll just give you two examples. One is a sin not for the sake of heaven, for your own lusts. The other one is a sin for the sake of heaven. Why? Because you want to do a mitzvah, and the only way to do it is to push aside the negative commandment. That's a sin for the sake of heaven. Okay, that's fine. But now, right, we come back, right, we just gave you the preamble, right, the introduction. So this is the low-level stuff, right? Now we're going to go to the big leagues. We're coming out of the minor leagues, right, going into the big leagues. Because this big league stuff is like very heavy, much more difficult to understand these things. So I'll explain to you why that is. As we said, right, getting back to the Gemara, Masechet Nazir, Daf Chav Gimel, it says over there that there was two that did Avera Lishma. They did a sin. Not Avera Lishma. They did a sin. Two people did a sin. Who was that? One of them was Tamar, and the other one was Zimri. So, in order to explain to you, the truth is you know both these stories, but I'll refresh your memory because you may have forgot. And also for the audience that we have, right? So let's go on and see all these, these things. So first of all, what's the story of Tamar? Tamar is like this, right? That Yehuda, who was one of the tribes, he had two sons, Er and Onan, and he got a daughter. He got a daughter, one of the daughters of the high priest, who was Shem at that time, and he married off his son to the daughter of the high priest. Her name was Tamar. So what happened was that this guy, we talked about this before, he died when he married her. Why is that? Because he was spilling a seed on the ground. Instead of, coming inside, he was spilling it. Why? He didn't want to have children, He wanted to do some contraception. So he was spilling outside. So God, once he saw that, he killed him, destroyed him, just killed him. So what happened was that now, Onan, who was the next brother in line, he came and married her now. There's leveret marriage. It's called ibum. What happens is that when a brother marries a certain woman, right, and he dies childless, it's a mitzvah for the brother to come in and marry that woman. It's a whole discussion in the Torah. We're not going to get into it now. But the point is, right, that's what he did. So now comes Onan and takes Tamar, in the place of Er. Er is dead. So comes Tamar and takes her. And what happens is that Onan also dies. Can you imagine? Two guys died, the same wife. So why did he die? Same thing, right? He spilled on the ground also, this guy. Both of them, very foolish people. Same thing. So therefore they both died. Because they're wasting seed. This was their sin. Okay, fine. So what happens is that now, right, Yehuda has also a third son. His name is Shelah. So what happens is that now Tamar, is expecting to go to the third son now, leveret marriage, as we said, right? It's a mitzvah for the brother to marry. So, okay, let me marry Shelah. So Yehuda tells Tamar, he always didn't like this business, that he's going to have a third son marrying her. Because he thought that maybe something was wrong with her, That's why the sons are dying. Maybe she has like bad luck, bad mazal, something is not kosher there. So he didn't really want to give the third son to marry her, He didn't really want it. But he gave her some, he talked to her, he talked some smooth talk with her. What does he say to her? So he says, you know what, he's still too young now, he's a kid. Wait till he grows up, and then I'll let you marry him. My third son, He really intended not to do it. But he kind of he talked it off, So what happened was that she was waiting, all that time that it took for him to grow up. So she waited several years, But she saw that when he grew up, she still wasn't being given to him to marry. Why was she so crazy, by the way, to marry from this family? What's the reason why? Because she knew that this family was tzaddikim, righteous people. And big people are destined to come from them, Who's destined to come from this union? Mashiach. King David HaMelech, and Mashiach comes from this union. So she wanted to be a part of that, a piece of the action. So that's why she wanted to marry into this family. Okay, so she's waiting. Yehuda doesn't want to give, this brother. So she's sitting there, waiting. How long am I going to wait, I'm going to rot over here, in this place. So what did she do? She decided to take things into her own hands. Vigilante work. Vigilante, can you imagine? So what did she do? She says, you know what I'm going to do? So this guy thinks he's going to trick me, He's not going to give me his son to marry. and hold me over here like a hostage? So she says, I'll teach him a lesson. So what does she do? Right? She goes and dresses up, and goes in the middle of the street somewhere, like a street girl, one of those girls that stand in the street. You know what they do, right? They go up to the cars, You know what I'm talking about, right? Like those girls. She stood over there, in the street. So what happens is that Yehuda happens to be traveling, on that street, and she knew that he was coming there. She got wind of it. So she was trying to seduce him to do the levirate marriage. Yehuda himself. And that's kosher, by the way. But the problem is that he didn't know. He didn't know who it was. Why? Because she covered her face. It's a whole discussion about that, what that means, cover her face, whatever. Anyway, well, we're not going to get into that now. That's not our scope. So what happens is, right, that Yehuda comes to her now and wants to, take her as a girlfriend, have relations with her. So she tells the lady, let's go, let's go. So she tells them, okay, what are you going to give me, How much? The fee. Right? So he decided to give her some things that he had, some personal items, valuable stuff, a ring, all kinds of things. Okay. So whatever it is, right, they decide to they fix a price. Right? And this ring is going to be like a deposit, until he he gives her cash. It wasn't actually cash, it was like animals, whatever it was. Anyway, the point is like this, right, that Yehuda now lives with her, and she got pregnant from that. That was her goal. She wanted to have children from this family at any cost. You understand? So what happened was that in the end, after 3 months, Yehuda now goes back to his normal life, like nothing happened, and then all of a sudden, boom, somebody comes to Yehuda, one of his servants, and says, "Oh my God," he says, "You know what happened? Your daughter-in-law, remember her, Tamar? She looks like she prostituted herself. She got pregnant. She got knocked up by somebody. Her stomach is showing." So he didn't know that it was her that he lived with. He didn't know. You understand? So right away he says, "Oh my God, we have to kill her, We have to execute her because of this." So what does she do? What does he do? Right? He decides to execute her, to have her burned, So as she's going, on death row, about to be executed, she stops, she stops to one of the people and tells him, "Here," he says, "Here, give this to Yehuda, and tell him, whoever this belongs to, I'm pregnant from that person." So what was that? That was a deposit that he left over there when he had business with her. Understand? So he realized it was his. So once he sees all that, the ring and all that, oh my God, then he realizes, it's his baby. He's about to now send her to death row. You know what I mean? So what does he do? He could have faked it and said, "Oh, yeah, well, let her die, as if nothing happened." But he didn't do that. He was humble, So what did he do? He said, "It's my fault, what happened over here. It's not her fault. Let her go, Let her off the hook." He didn't realize what happened. So what happened was that she got away, in the end. And from her came the kings of the Davidic dynasty, all the prophets that came from there, all the holy people. And Mashiach is going to come from her too, that union. So Gemara says, you see, right, that she did a sin, Tamar, but look what happened, right? She got all the goodies, all the bounty she got, right? Kings, Mashiach, David HaMelech. She got the whole the jackpot. She hit the jackpot.
So then you could say the same thing about Obama's mother.
Well, we're not going to get into that now, but anyway, what do you see from here, right? That apparently she did a sin. What sin did she do? What sin did she do, by the way? What was her sin? The truth is, that the sin that she did was very, very slight, not really something heavy. What does that mean? That she wanted to, she wanted to, have children from this family, and she was really supposed to go with the brothers, one of the brothers, But since she was being prevented from doing that, so she went with she tricked him, and so it's really not a big transgression over here. Why? Because she was doing it for the sake of heaven, to have these children that she wants to have. You know what I mean? It wasn't really a big sin that what she did. The truth is that technically there was no sin.
This may give our lady viewers some ideas.
So, what happens is like this, right? That now
Her intentions were
very noble. Yeah, very noble.
Her
Yeah.
intentions were noble.
Okay, so we see, right? This is what the Gemara calls Avera Lishma. It's a sin for the sake of heaven. Okay, fine. Now comes Zimri, right? The other story. What was Zimri? Zimri was in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. He was from Shevet Shimon. So what he did was, he did prostitution. Why? Because he brought one of the daughters of Moab. There was a Goya, Shiksa, non-Jewish lady. He brought her to Moshe Rabbeinu and says, "Is this allowed for me to have this non-Jewish girl?" Moshe Rabbeinu says, "No, what are you talking about? Non-Jewish girls are not allowed." So he says, "Then who allowed you to have Tzipora? Your wife was also not Jewish." But what was the difference? His wife was converted. He converted her. You know what I mean? This girl, he didn't convert. So he tried to pull a scam like that, and then he went into a room, to do some business with her. You know what I mean? So came Pinchas, right? Jama'ato, came Pinchas, and he killed them. Right? So the Zimri did not do L'Shem Shamayim, what he did, right? He didn't do Lishma. He didn't do it for the sake of heaven. So what happened? 24,000 people got killed because of Zimri's sin. So Gemara says, you see, right? It all depends on your intention. If your intention is good, right? If your intention is good, Lishma, so then you're bringing holy people into the world. Kings, prophets, Mashiach, King David, all that. But if your intention is bad, like Zimri, for Znut, for promiscuity, 24,000 people, you shot dead. So Gemara tries to prove from there, it all has to do with your intention, what your intentions are. It compares these two things. But the truth is, that besides these two stories, we have even more difficult stories than this. These are relatively lightweight stories. Now we're going to get into the heavy stuff. How heavy can you go, right? How heavy can it go? So there's also a few more stories about this Avera Lishma, right? Doing a sin for the sake of heaven. The classic case that the Gemara brings over there, Masechet Nazir, Chaf Gimel, is the story of Yael. So who was Yael, and when was she alive? Yael was a very nice lady, very tzaddikat. She was actually one of the prophets of Israel. She was a prophetess lady, very holy lady she was. And she was one of the descendants of Yitro. Yitro was the one who converted, Moshe Rabbeinu converted him to Judaism. So his offspring, also converted, and they had children, and so she was one of them, descendants of Yitro. So what happened was that she did a very boisterous kind of deed, very controversial. But even though it was super controversial, the Gemara praises her, as if she's the holiest woman that ever lived. More than Sarah Imenu, more than Rivka Imenu, more than Rachel Imenu, all the patriarchs are mothers. She's better than all of them, the Gemara says. What does that mean? How is she better? So you know what the story is? At that time, in that generation, what happened was that there was a certain king, Canaanite king, who was ruling in Eretz Israel. The Jews at that time didn't yet throw out all the Canaanim, all the Canaanites that were there. They were supposed to banish all of them from there. But they didn't do the job yet. They were very slow. They were very lazy, lazy daisy. So what happened was that this king, Yachin, had a general, and he was making war against the Jews, and terrorizing them, terrorists, like Arafat, one of these guys, terrorism. So what happens is that this guy had chariots, very big chariots, tanks, and he was terrorizing the Jews. They couldn't beat him. There was no way they could beat him. So he had a general called Sisra. Sisra was a big, mighty man, and he was the one who was conducting all the wars against the Jews, and giving them a very hard time, killing them, destroying, pillaging, plundering everything, anything you can think of. So they were in dire straits, the Jews at that time, because of this whole thing. So what happened was that came Devorah, right, who was the judge at that time, and waged a war against them. So what happened was that in that war, the Jews started to beat, the enemies. Sisera. So Sisera, he saw that he was beaten. The Jews beat him. So what happened was that he ran off. He escaped from this battle scene. So what does he do? He starts to run. Run off. He sees that he's going to be killed. Starts running. So all of a sudden, right, he's looking for like a place to hide. Until the wrath subsides. Looking for a place to hide. So what happened was that he found Yael, right, who was this lady that we just talked about. Very holy lady, right? So she was a married lady, this lady. She was married. So what happened? She sees him, running in the street, like this, and she tells him, come in, I'll protect you, come in here. Don't worry, I got your back. Step inside. So she's over there alone in the tent. They were dwelling in tents, these people, because they were like like today you have these Bedouins, they were like that, these people. Not all the Jews were like that. This was like a small group of people like that. So what happens is that she's dwelling in a tent. So she tells him, come in, I'll protect you, don't worry, I got your back. So he comes in there, So all of a sudden, she gives him like a big, splurge, food, drinks, this, that, whatever, all kinds of stuff. So, but her intentions were very, were not good for him. You know what I mean? Her intentions were to destroy him. But she did it like in a sneaky way, You know how it is, right? So, with guile, So what did she do? She gives him like a big bowl of milk, like hot milk, which like usually puts you to sleep. Like in the old days when they had that raw milk, not like the pasteurized stuff we have today, which is like water, it's like water, it's watered down. So what happens is she tells him, here, drink this bowl of milk, and he ate and everything, so he was like really tired, because of the milk, it made him drowsy. So, but that wasn't enough because this guy was so strong, the milk wouldn't knock him out. There wasn't enough to knock him out. He was a very powerful man. So what happens is, what happens? That she tells him, she kind of like, seduced him, because he had a lot of energy, So she figured the only way I can weaken this guy is to have, some relations with him, to seduce him, So she seduced him, But her intentions were to weaken him, not to enjoy it, So what happened? Says in the Gemara over there, Masechet Nazir, 7 times he lived with her that night. Right? 7 times he had relations with her. Can you imagine? 7? That's how strong he was. So what happened was that once he did it 7 times, the guy's already like knocked out, like he's really knocked out. Now he's really, it weakens the body, With us, like even barely 1 time we're already weak, So what happens is that comes now, right, Yael, he fell asleep. She takes like one of the pegs of the tent, that holds up the tent. She takes a hammer, and pushes it into his head, She put the peg into his head, she killed him, destroyed him. Mutilated his head. That's what she did. So says the Gemara, this was the ultimate example of Avera Lishma, a sin for the sake of heaven. What do you think about that? Pretty crazy, no?
I guess so.
I think you've been humbled by this whole stuff. I see you've been humbled. Okay, so now let's go to another story. I'll give you 2 more stories. That's enough for you, right? You don't need any more. I don't want to make you crazy tonight, having some nightmares. So, another story is like this, right? What about the story of Esther? Right? The Purim story. Now Purim is coming up in 2 weeks. What's the story over there, right? That she went to marry Achashverosh, even though she was married to Mordechai. He took her against her will. He was a king, What can you do? Can you tell the king, no, I'm married to this guy? What will he do? He'll kill that guy. So therefore, she didn't say nothing. She went with him, and so he was living with her, having relations with her, and at the same time married to Mordechai at the same time. Can you imagine? This is what was going on. So what happens is like this, right? That now, every time that he comes to have relations with her, it's like, a sin. It's adultery. Can you imagine? So how did she do that? How was she allowed to do that? Who was guiding her, by the way, to do all these things? Mordechai, who was her husband. He was the one who was guiding her. Do like this, do like that, do like. What do you mean do like this? What? This is your wife. What, you prostituting your wife? How can you do such a thing like that? Another story, right? We're going to explain, by the way, these stories, what happened there. Another story is a famous story of Lot, right? Lot was the nephew of Avraham Avinu, and Lot was like a, funky character, one of these funny guys, not reliable, a little sleazy, sleazy guy. So what happened was that he had two daughters, and he was living in Sodom and Gomorrah, over that area. So when it was overturned, God overturned it. The angels came, overturned the city. Everything was destroyed. So, but he was saved. The angel saved him, and he went with his two daughters and escaped. So what happened was that they went into a cave, to dwell there. You know the story, right? You're familiar with this. So he went into a cave over there, and he had incest with his daughters over there. How did that happen? What, incest with your daughters? What happened? So they say, the Chazal, the whole story was like this, right? That Lot, was, as we said, right? He wasn't really a kosher guy, this guy, a little bit, suspicious guy, one of those guys, suspect. So he actually, his intentions were not good. You know what I mean? He wanted to do some action. But the whole thing was like this, right? That his daughters, their intentions were good. So what was their intention? They're the ones who instigated this whole thing, right? They seduced him. How they do it? They brought some wine, right, for him to drink. They didn't bring it. It was already there. They say, right, that it was in the cave already there. Can you imagine? Hashem put the wine in the cave that this should happen. So the wine was already there. So what happened was they gave him to drink one night, and then the big daughter came and lived with him. And the second night, the same thing, then this little daughter came and lived with him. They both got pregnant. So from there came out two nations, right? Ammon and Moab, who are really, not such good people. But anyway, the point is, right, that the Gemara says that these two ladies also, right, the daughters of Lot, they meant L'Shem Shemaim. It was for the sake of heaven. What for the sake of heaven? What does that mean? So what they thought, they made a mistake, They thought that when they saw the whole area was being destroyed, Sodom and Gomorrah, there was like over there 5 cities. So it was like a metropolis, a big, huge metropolis. So the whole thing got destroyed, like from nothing was left over. So they thought, these ladies, that the whole world was destroyed, They thought it was like a Armageddon, destruction, like nothing left over. So they said, you know what? If we don't live with our father and have some children, the world will lose its population, The human race will become extinct. We're the only ones left over. That's why they did it.
Maybe that's the same excuse Epstein used.
Yeah. Maxwell, yeah. So what happens is like this, right? That now comes, these ladies, and they get pregnant, they have children. So all these things were Avera Lishma. They were for the sake of heaven, all these things that we just mentioned. But the question is, technically speaking, how does it work out? I mean, what's the logic over here? In other words, in halakha, in Jewish law, how is this allowed to do? What's the technical vehicle that this comes? How do you justify in halakha such a thing like this? We have to understand that. So Gemara says they're all justified. So the question is how? Okay, so let's try to understand a little bit, right? Let's go. We have to hear 3 stories. We got to understand each one. What's going on, right? So the story with the Lot and his daughters, the one we just mentioned now, is probably the most simple one. What does that mean? That they thought they were saving the world. The human race was going extinct. So therefore they said, we're allowed to do a sin of incest in order to save the world from destruction. So what does that mean? Comes the mitzvah of saving the world from destruction and overrides the prohibition of incest. You understand? It's fairly simple to understand that, not so complicated. But when it comes to...
But there is a prohibition, right?
There is a prohibition, but it gets pushed aside.
I see.
You know what I mean? In this case. That's what we call Avera Lishma. It's a sin for the sake of heaven. So now let's talk about the other two, because these are a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
Why do I tell you that?
This is the sickest one.
Well, okay, if you want to do ratings, I don't know, but right now let's talk about the other ones. Right, so let's talk about Esther. So Esther, how was she able to have adultery, with this king? Not only that, Gemara says not only she was doing adultery with the king, and she was going back and living with her husband at the same time. Can you imagine? First this guy, then the other guy. Take turns. Wait online. Can you imagine something like that?
Were these, I don't even know what to call them, these halachas or these sins for the sake of heaven.
Yeah.
Were they amendments made throughout history?
The whole Torah we received on Har Sinai. That's the truth. There's no amendments. There's no nothing.
So these were there already.
Of course, it's all there. It's all there. Yeah. It's all there. Of course. They say even the rabbinical edicts that were made later on, Moshe Rabbeinu already knew what was going to be made. Hashem told him it's going to be like this, it's going to be like that, it's going to be like that. He told him the whole future.
I see.
The whole. So okay. So now when it comes to Esther, what's the story with Esther? The story is, that she was doing adultery, and then going back and living with her husband at the same time. What is that? How does that come? So Gemara says the way it works is like this: that she was being raped by this guy. In other words, she wasn't voluntarily living with him. If you don't live with him, he'll kill you. He'll have you executed. This is not this is not Switzerland. We're not talking about that, right? This is not some kind of enlightened some country with human rights. No such a thing like that. You rebel against the king, you're dead meat. So therefore, she was being raped by this guy. So what does that mean, right? We already discussed this, right, a couple of weeks ago, that when a woman lives with another man, she can't go back to her husband anymore. How is she going back to her husband? Gemara asks this question. What's the answer? The answer is that she was being raped. She wasn't willingly doing it. So they call that karka olam. What does that mean, karka olam? A woman, by the way, by definition, is not the one who instigates the sex. It's a man. In other words, he's the active partner. The woman is passive. You know what I mean? She's a female. So what does that mean? The active one is the one who's more liable, and the passive one less so. You know what I mean? So she was passive. She wasn't doing anything. She was being raped by this guy every day. So therefore, when you're being raped, you're not forbidden to your husband. Only when you do it willingly. And this is the reason why she was not forbidden to her husband. Can you imagine such a thing like that? So that one is fairly, simple. I mean, relatively easy to understand. Even though it's not very pleasant to hear it. But the truth is, the one with Yael is probably the most difficult one. But, even though it's the most difficult one, Gemara considers it like to be the biggest mitzvah of all of them, what she did. The biggest mitzvah.
So
Even though, there are levels, right, exactly, Her sacrifice was bigger than all the others. So therefore, she's praised more than all the other women who did this kind of thing. So what's the story with that? Right? So the answer is like this, right? That Yael, she really didn't, she wasn't being raped by this guy. She invited him in. You know what I mean? She said, come in here. And she kind of seduced him too, So it wasn't exactly like she was raped by the guy. The truth is that we find a machloket, by the way, about that. Exactly what happened over there. Some say she was raped also by this guy, In other words, he egged them on a little bit, But eventually he raped her, You know what I mean? It's a very fine line. That's one way of looking at it. The other way is to look at it is that he didn't rape her at all. She did it willingly. She seduced him. So if that's the case, now we're not talking about Esther's case. Esther was being raped every day. So what happened with Yael? What's the story over there? So the truth is, that there's two approaches about how this is allowed to do such a thing like that. It's very difficult to understand. I'll tell you what the difficulty is. The halacha says that if somebody comes and forces you to do a sin, tells you, listen, if you don't sin, I'll kill you. So what's the rule? Should you give up your life or do the sin? What should you do? So for all the other sins, you should not give up your life. Do the sin and live. If they force you, no choice. But there's 3 sins, cardinal sins, right? That you're supposed to give up your life for them. What is that? Avodah zarah, idolatry, right? And the promiscuity, which is what we're talking about here, right? And the other one is murder. For those 3 sins, you're supposed to give up your life and not do it. So now we're coming to Yael, right? She did promiscuity. She was a married woman. She committed adultery 7 times. How did she do that? Because really, right, the truth is, according to the halakha we just learned, which is brought down in Shulchan Aruch, by the way, it's not something like from the sky, It's in Shulchan Aruch. So how did she do it? She was supposed to kill herself for that, and not be with this gangster, Sisra. So what are you praising? What, you're praising a woman who committed adultery? She was supposed to kill herself for that. So what's the answer to that question? Not so easy, by the way, to understand that. So the truth is, in Tosfot, it brings 2 opinions about this, about what the permission was here. According to Rabbeinu Tam, you know what he says? That when the sages said, right, that you're supposed to give up your life for promiscuity, it doesn't mean like for a goy. It means for a Jew. In other words, to promiscuity with a Jew, to do promiscuity with a Jew. But for a goy, you're not supposed to give up your life. That's Rabbeinu Tam. That's one approach. But comes the Tosfot and doesn't agree with Rabbeinu Tam. And the truth is that most of them do not agree with Rabbeinu Tam. They say that even for a goy, you're supposed to give up your life when it comes to promiscuity. It doesn't matter whether it's a goy or a Jew, right? I mean to say that you're a Jew, to live with a goy. That's the question, right? Should you give up your life on that or not? That's the question. You're a Jew. So most of them don't agree with Rabbeinu Tam. They say you're supposed to give up your life even for a goy, even to live with a goy. So then, how did she do what she did? How did she commit adultery like that? She should have given up her life, committed suicide. I don't know. So what's the story with that? So it says the Tosfot. You know what it is? So as we said, right? Just want to point out one thing. We cannot say here the answer to Esther, right? That she was raped. She was not raped. As we said, right? She seduced him. So then what, we're pretty much in the corner over here, like we're cornered. We don't have any answers left, right, apparently. So comes Tosfot and says there is an answer. And by the way, this answer is ingenious. Very, very true. So you know what the Tosfot says? It says Tosfot, when we say that you're not allowed, you have to give up your life and not to do promiscuity, that's talking about when? It's talking about for a personal issue. Here, this was not a personal issue. So what was it then? She was trying to save the whole Jewish people. Because this guy, was a gangster. He was going to wipe out the Jews. He was a Hitler, this guy. One of those, That's what he was. So the whole Jewish nation was in trouble. It wasn't just her herself, her life. We're not talking about your life. We're talking about everybody's life. So there, right, the Torah doesn't go that far. The Torah doesn't tell you, listen, give up everybody's life and don't do promiscuity. What, are you crazy? What, the whole world, you should give up because of one promiscuity? Does that sound logical? No. Right? So the whole world, the whole Jewish people, we cannot give it up for promiscuity. So therefore the rule is, it says Tosfot, that because of this reason, that she was not saving just herself. She was saving the whole Jewish people. This was a war. You know what I mean? Like World War II, Hitler, something like that. That's what it was. So what does that mean? It comes and tells us that in a case like that, where the life of the whole Jewish people is online, you're allowed to do promiscuity. The Torah didn't talk about that. It talked about just for individuals. Like to save an individual life. I'm not talking about for the whole Jewish people. That's the idea, right? So now we understand a little bit better, right? What this is, Avera Lishma. Okay, fine, So I just want to tell you a little bit of a conclusion over here. There are some, by the way, some rabbis, contemporary rabbis, last 300 years, like the Ramchal and the Rabbi Volozhin. You know what they say, right? That they say today it doesn't exist such a thing like this concept. In other words, practically speaking, today, no such a concept exists that you can practically do. But the truth is, that it could actually, exist. I mean, theoretically speaking. So it seems like they were saying this, because they had like certain situations, they had trouble in their generations. That people were becoming like promiscuous, So to avoid that, they were like trying to clamp down and say, today you cannot do such a thing like that. No such a thing like that, right? It doesn't exist. The truth is, it does exist. Nothing has changed. You know what I mean? But they were trying to discourage the people, from relying on that to do sins. That's the whole thing, you know what I mean? So they were doing it in a smart way. But the point is, nothing has really changed, right? Olam kamin hagon noheg, right? So the truth is that it is what it is. But nevertheless, right, we have to conclude with one thing. That before a person decides, it dawns upon him to do such a thing like this, a sin, for the sake of heaven, he has to make sure that he's really, really up on halakha, knows what he's doing. You know what I mean? Otherwise, one little hair's breadth difference, it could come to a big sin like that. Destroys soul. So a person who's doing this kind of thing, you better have a very good rabbi, like somebody who can advise you, Otherwise, the truth is that in the sense that they're right, these rabbis, what they said, it almost doesn't exist, like in most cases. This is a very rare kind of thing, which can only exist. We're talking about, the whole Jewish people, their life is online, Can you imagine, like, World War II, let's say, like you could have killed Hitler, somehow. Like sent like a woman over there, some Jewish lady, to seduce him and kill him. Would you do it? In a second, right? You're saving the Jewish people. We're talking about things like that, you know what I mean? Of course you do it. If you don't do it, you're crazy. You know what I mean? You have to know what you're talking about. So the truth is, it does exist, but it's very, very rare. To most people, this is never going to happen. But when it comes to the lower levels, just like positive mitzvah comes and pushes aside negative mitzvah, that can happen to anybody any day. Something else.
You don't think that over the years the Jewish population has not extinct, but diminished?
It has dwindled, yeah. But there's like a cycle, it goes up, down, It's like a cycle. Eventually, when Mashiach comes, there will be like an explosion of population for the Jewish people. That's the way it's going to be. Because nobody's going to be able to harm us anymore after that happens. Baruch Adonai le'olam amen. Thanks for coming. God bless you.
I'm not even
Chazak
talking
u'baruch.
about that. I'm talking about how, the Jewish people intermarry and
You have all kinds of problems. Be blessed with health, wealth, and happiness. Chodesh Tov. Amen ve'amen. Chazak u'baruch. Thank you for coming.
we've been here